For only the third time in nearly 3 decades, Apple is about to get a new chief executive. John Ternus will become Apple CEO on September 1st, 2026, succeeding Tim Cook after almost exactly 15 years at the helm. Cook isn't leaving Apple. He'll move into the newly created role of executive chairman of the board. The transition is significant for reasons beyond the change at the top. Steve Jobs was Apple's product visionary, Cook became one of corporate America's greatest operators, and Ternus comes from yet another background. He's fundamentally a hardware engineer. That could tell us something about what Apple believes it needs for its next era. Who is John Ternus? Ternus isn't an outsider being brought in to shake up Apple. He's about as much of an Apple insider as it's possible to be without having been there during the Steve Jobs next years. He joined Apple's product design team in 2001, meaning he has spent roughly 25 years inside the company. Before Apple, he worked as a mechanical engineer at Virtual Research Systems and earned a bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering from the University of Pennsylvania. Ternus steadily moved up Apple's hardware organization, becoming Vice President of Hardware Engineering in 2013 and Senior Vice President in 2021. By then, his responsibilities included some of Apple's most important products. He's one of the people behind the modern iPhone, Mac, and iPad. Ternus has overseen hardware engineering for products including the iPhone, Mac, iPad, AirPods, and Apple Watch. Perhaps most importantly, he played a major role in Apple's transition of the Mac away from Intel processors and toward Apple's own custom silicon. That transition helped turn the Mac into one of Apple's most technically differentiated product lines. More recently, Apple increasingly put Ternus in front of the public during major product announcements. That visibility was notable because Apple executives don't simply become prominent spokespeople by accident. Long before the CEO announcement, Ternus was widely viewed as one of Cook's most plausible successors. Why is Tim Cook leaving? There's no indication Cook is being pushed out because Apple is struggling financially. Quite the opposite. Apple reported $109.4 billion in revenue for its June 2026 quarter, up 16% from the previous year and the strongest June quarter in company history. Earnings per share increased 29%. Cook is 65 and has now led Apple since August 2011, when Steve Jobs stepped aside because of his declining health. Apple says the Ternus appointment resulted from a long-term succession planning process, and its board unanimously approved the transition. In other words, this looks much more like an orderly handoff than a corporate rescue operation. And Tim Cook isn't really going away. This may be one of the most important parts of the transition. That Cook will become Apple's executive chairman rather than simply retiring. Apple says he'll continue assisting with certain aspects of the company, including engagement with policymakers around the world. That could be extremely useful for Ternus. Cook has spent decades developing relationships with governments, suppliers, and business leaders around the world. Ternus can concentrate on running Apple while still having access to one of the most experienced executives in global business. It also reduces the risk of an abrupt cultural break. Ternus is taking over a very different Apple than Cook did. When Cook became CEO in 2011, Apple was already extraordinarily successful, but it was still largely a consumer hardware company built around the iPhone, Mac, and rapidly growing iPad. Today's Apple is vastly larger. Cook leaves behind a company worth trillions of dollars with an enormous services operation, hundreds of millions of customers, a sprawling global supply chain, and one of the world's most valuable technology ecosystems. But Ternus inherits problems Cook didn't have to confront in quite the same way. Artificial intelligence may be the biggest. AI could define the Ternus era. Apple spent decades benefiting from the smartphone becoming the center of people's digital lives. AI raises the uncomfortable possibility that the next major computing interface won't necessarily begin with opening an app on an iPhone. That makes Apple's response to AI strategically critical. Ternus will have to oversee the integration of increasingly powerful AI into Apple's devices, while competitors pursue their own visions involving assistants, wearables, autonomous agents, and new hardware. At the same time, he can't neglect the business that already exists. The iPhone still has to sell. Macs and iPads need to remain competitive. Services have to grow. Apple's enormous supply chain needs to function. That combination makes the job unusually difficult. Why pick a hardware guy in the age of AI? This may initially seem like the strange part, If AI is Apple's biggest challenge, why choose a mechanical engineer and hardware executive instead of an AI or software leader? Because Apple's greatest advantage may ultimately be the hardware through which consumers experience AI. Apple controls the phone, watch, computer, tablet, earbuds, and increasingly other devices surrounding its customers. If AI eventually moves beyond typing prompts into a chatbot and becomes something constantly available through cameras, microphones, wearables, and personal devices, hardware suddenly becomes incredibly important again. Ternus has spent his career building exactly those devices. That doesn't guarantee he'll succeed with AI, but it makes his appointment more interesting than simply choosing the safest internal candidate. There is another fascinating parallel. Ternus will be 50 years old when he takes over. Tim Cook was also 50 when he succeeded Steve Jobs. That potentially gives Ternus a very long runway. If he remained CEO until roughly Cook's current age, Ternus could lead Apple for another 15 years. Think about how different technology could look by 2041. AI, robotics, augmented reality, health technology, and entirely new computing devices could fundamentally change what Apple sells. Ternus may therefore be inheriting Apple at another technological inflection point. Apple is about to enter its third modern era. Steve Jobs returned to Apple in 1997 and rebuilt a company that was approaching irrelevance into one of the most innovative consumer technology businesses in history. Tim Cook inherited that company and transformed it into an extraordinarily efficient global business machine. Now, John Ternus gets a different assignment. He doesn't need to save Apple. He doesn't even need to prove Apple's existing business works. He needs to answer a much harder question. What comes after the iPhone era? That's why the John Ternus appointment matters. The interesting story isn't simply that Apple has chosen a new CEO. It's that for the first time since 2011, someone new gets to decide what Apple becomes next.